And keeping somebody on that wasn't in culture long eroded trust with my team. So by the time I fired her, a lot of damage had been done. Like I was having people saying like, it's either her or me, and like, I will leave. People that had been with me a long time. So I realized that I was a bad leader. I got seduced by the money, and I didn't focus on the culture, and it was a valuable lesson. I was like, I'll never do that again.
Rob, thank you so much for coming all the way to Miami to record this podcast.
It was so much suffering to come to Miami.
It's not hard to convince people to come visit me in Miami, especially once the leaves start to fall off the trees. So one of the things I always like to convey is, you know, in your local market, the DMV, as well as the national market, you're really well known. You've built a multi-state operation, which is really hard, and then you've built a network on top of that. So before we get to that, I always want to walk people through, like, how did you even get into the business? I know the story, but I want to share it with everybody.
When I was 24, my best friend approached me and said, listen, I want to start a recruiting business placing technical salespeople. A guy approached him at a bar and said, I'll pay you $5,000 for an entry-level salesperson. And I said, if you could do that, I'm joining you. So I built that business with him for the next 7 years. So we rode the dot-com boom, we did the dot-com bust, like we grew to like 15 recruiters, whittled down to 3, and then we grew it back. And by the summer of 2005, I had fallen in love with real estate, because you remember what was going on in real estate during that time, right? Like asset values were just going up the whole time. And so if I needed to make some more money, I would just sell an asset, because you know, when the dot-com implosion happened, I went from making $250,000 to $50,000, like overnight. Recently married, just had a baby girl. So if I needed to make some additional money, I'd just sell an asset, and it would fill the hole, and I'd move on. And there was something fundamentally wrong with that business. Like every month you start at 0, and I hated the idea of starting at 0 every single month, right? So I wanted to get into an asset class where I could do something one time and then get paid forever. And real estate was my option for that. So my wife and I were just buying one house a year, and by the summer of 2005, we said, let's do this full time. Like no model, no system, no nothing, let's just do it. But I also knew that the summer of 2005 felt a lot like the dot-com rational exuberance that I experienced during the heyday that I told.
Did you feel crazy? Because most people, I agree with the feeling, but most people in the industry thought you and I were crazy.
Well, I knew what it felt like before, and I saw what had happened, right? So I missed it the first time, but the second time it would like slap me in the face. So I said, well, let's sell a couple assets, let's stabilize our life. I think real estate is going to go through some kind of recession. I just don't know what that looks like. And if we could ride it out, I think we'll be in a good position when it comes back. I just didn't know how bad it was going to be, right? So 2005, we just started flipping houses. We went to a sub-market a couple hours away from where we lived, and that's where I cut my teeth. Got my license purely just for referral fees, and then in 2008, like everything was 50% off, and I just decided to start buying properties at 50 cents on the dollar, because it was the 1% rule. Like they peaked at 370. I was buying at $1.50, dollar cost averaging houses, right? 150, 140, 130, 120. And then just burring. It wasn't called burr back then, where I was just cash out refi. But I was using my license and working with investors to get access to the properties faster and all the rest. So by 2009, like I was like, oh, I think I should probably spend more time on the agent side of the business. I saw so many investors get crushed on the development side, and I wanted to increase my cash cycle, right? So I was like, I think we could build a team on the agent side, create all my active income there, and then continue to buy assets. And that kind of became our model. So for the next 10 years, I kind of, you know, I don't want to say fell into the trap, that's the wrong word, but kind of like focused more on the agent side of the business, learned how to build those teams, and then by 2019, I was like, you know, I haven't bought as much as I used to buy. I need to go back in and start buying again. Because when I looked at my net worth, the majority of all my money was from assets that I'd purchased in 2008 and 2009. So during that course of doing all that, I learned how to open multiple offices, but I was getting so much friction in the model that I was in because it was a franchise model. So if I wanted to go open up an office, I literally had to fly into town, kiss the ring, woo everybody, try to work out a different structure financially for my team. And it just felt like I was swimming upstream. And I said, wouldn't it be nice to swim downstream at one point? And that's when I just started looking at other models. And I looked at all the other models, and well, you know what I ended up selecting. So that's a condensed version of, right, 17 years.
Yeah, and again, I've had the pleasure of knowing you since when you walked in. I turned out to be your first broker in real estate when I looked not old enough to buy alcohol. But take us through going from an agent, because when I met you, you were just starting out in the sales business, right?
Yep.
And I think a lot of agents get stuck in that, like, do I build a team? Do I stay a solo practitioner? And I don't think there's a right or wrong answer, but you've actually kind of done all of it, right? You've been a solo practitioner to you build a team to now you have teams in multiple states. Walk us through kind of that progression and that decision tree. And obviously, what I always want to showcase is, like, people see a finished product and don't realize that there's a whole lot of pain and mistakes in between.
Okay, so, well, I didn't know what I didn't know. So I saw the shiny people on stage, and I was like, oh, I want that, right? But you don't know what that actually requires. And then, you know, when you start getting there, you realize that a lot of those people, it's all show, right? It's all show. Like, they don't run profitable businesses. They don't have investments. Luckily, as I was building this team, and I went from solo, right, agent to small business, or 5 agents, right? That seemed like a lot of heavy lifting. I had that investment group that I had started, which was really a big lead gen tool for all of the businesses, property management, construction. And I just happened to be building those other things because my clients needed those services. And so we just started helping them. And the pain that I experienced was, in that whole process, nobody tells you that there's actually a decision tree. You could win the game by selling a ton of property as a solo agent with some leverage, right? Showing partners, an assistant. And you can make a ton of money because you're super profitable. And you could take that money and just buy assets for the next 10 to 15 years. And that model works really well, and you could be done. When you decide to build a team, you're actually going on a leadership journey. And nobody prepares you for what that leadership journey actually means. So you have to skill up in a whole nother skill, right? Like, you learned how to sell, and you got really good at that. But now you have to skill up on leading people and motivating people and working through people. And that's not for everybody. And so I had to make a mental decision. Do I want to continue down this path, or do I want to retrench back and, you know, just continue to buy assets? Because, like, assets did their work 24/7, never talked back to me.
The tenants do once in a while.
Every now and then, but you have a manager in between you, right?
Absolutely.
So it's really, they're reporting to me. So, but I decided I wanted to push through to see how big I can actually build this thing, right? And so I think that's the piece that people don't talk enough about, is that you can win the game a couple different ways. And the way I define winning the game is when your businesses and your assets actually cover your burn, right? And a lot of agents don't understand the game that they're actually playing. Like, that is the game. We want to help families buy homes, sell homes, and as a business owner, you want to build something that's actually going to cover your burn, so that you could do what you want to do when you want to do it with the people that matter most in your life, right? So I got very clear on why I was playing the game. And then something interesting happened. I fell in love with the entrepreneur. I fell in love with the person, the real estate agent, that was on this train without a map, right? Nobody was explaining to them the game that they were actually playing. Nobody, I mean, you had a lot of sales coaches, and that's great, right? It's like, great. But nobody was helping on the wealth side. And so I was like, I want to fill that gap. And so that's when we decided to convert our investment network and have it led only by agent investors. So that investment network has 25,000 people in it now. It's 40 communities around the country, and they're led by agent investors. And I put them at the center of the transaction so that I can empower them. They're also the biggest connectors in a community, right? They know all the contractors and the attorneys and the investors. And so I was like, okay, well, this is what I'm going to do for the next 20 years, right? I'll continue to build this network. I'll continue to build businesses. That network is a lead gen funnel for my individual businesses. So when I could go open up a community, a chapter, and build a team off of that one thing. So I control that lead gen arm. And that's when I decided this is the platform for me, to be honest with you, because it removed all the friction I was feeling in the other platform.
So now, how did you start the Grid Network? Because right now you just said 40 communities, 25,000 people. Again, that's a very super finished product.
Yeah.
That is.
Well, it's always evolving, always growing.
But how did you start the first one? How did you decide to expand it?
Sure. The first one was just me running my first community. I was like, okay, I want to get in the relationship with people that love what I love, which is real estate investing and building wealth. And so I would host one event every single month. And the first meeting had 5 people. Second one had 15. Third one had like 30. Then it grew to 50. Then it grew to 100. Before I knew it, I had 150 people in the room. And they're like, everybody's like, this is awesome. Can you do one in my community? I drove 40 hours from here. And 40 minutes from here, an hour from here, not 40 hours. And I turned down a bunch of people, said, no, I'm not interested. Finally, somebody came to me and said, hey, I will license how you do this if you just arrange it, right? So I said, okay, well, let's try that. So we packaged it, we built content around it, and then we launched the first one. And we saw that grow. We saw it grow their business. And then somebody else said, hey, I'd love to have one in Baltimore. So we packaged it, opened it up in Baltimore. Then we went to, St. Pete, and then we went to, and so we just started going to other markets around the country. And during that time, we were trying to figure out who's the avatar to run them, right? That's what we were trying to figure out. Because it takes somebody who wants to have an event strategy lead generation tool, so that's a different type of person, right? It takes somebody that wants to pour into people, so you have to be somewhat of a teacher personality. And then I realized I wanted to put agents at the center of that conversation. So then it was like, okay, I need agents that understand investments. The problem is a lot of them don't. So we had to create a certification process to put them through so that they could actually learn the whole game and understand the game that they're actually playing, right? Everything from wholesaling all the way to being the bank, right? And everything in between. So we set up like an 8-week course to do that so people can go through that process, and then those that are deserving and actually have a social following could open up a Grid community.
So what do you look for? It seems like you have a checklist of what the ideal partner looks like.
We found somebody, they need to have leverage already, so they need to already run a team. They need to be successful in their local market. Why? Because marketing an event takes energy, and so you need a marketing person to help market that event. You need somebody that's got a heart of a teacher, so they have to want to pour into other people and really just come from the idea of givers gain, like that whole idea, the go-giver. And then the third, they need to understand investments, and they have to already be investing themselves. They need to be walking the walk, talking the talk. And if we have if we have that person, and that person qualifies to be a leader. And we signed a year-long agreement with them. And we said, hey, like all good marketing, it takes about a year to really build this thing out. But if you build it right, you will not have to do any other type of lead generation. Literally, that's it. Right?
And what type of business size is that?
$1 million plus in GCI, somewhere around there.
Wow.
Right? So for somebody that we want to select, have we selected people that do less? Yes. But we find if they're doing about $1 million, they get it, right? Our Knoxville team, for example, they're not there yet. They're at like 600,000 in GCI. They actually run the best community that we have across the board because one of the leaders there is really good at collaboration with other people. He's great at taking concepts and training other people to do it. So will we make exceptions? Yes, but for the most part, we want larger teams. Right.
No, and so tell us about some of the expensive, painful lessons learned, whether it was building your team or Grid.
Painful, expensive lessons. Okay, well, here's one. I realized early in my career that if you have a team of 5 or 6 agents and you're all Navy SEALs, if one or two of them leave, that leaves a big gap in your income. So I had one agent in particular that was doing around 900,000 in GCI herself, right? And we were maybe a team of 10 at the time. And we were doing about 3 million in GCI at the time. So it was a third of the business that walked out the door,
that's
right?
a big hole.
Now, there was 2 lessons though. Lesson number 1 was, okay, I need to diversify. I need to have a larger team, right? But the second lesson was this particular person wasn't in culture, and I kept her on for too long. And keeping somebody on that wasn't in culture long eroded trust with my team. So by the time I fired her, a lot of damage had been done. Like I was having people saying, like, it's either her or me, and like I will leave. People that had been with me a long time. So I realized that I was a bad leader. I got seduced by the money, and I didn't focus on the culture, and it was a valuable lesson. I was like, I'll never do that again. And then I also need to build a bigger team, right? So that not any one agent will affect, my P&L the way that particular loss did.
Yeah, the diversification works in many
ways.
Many ways.
Right. With asset classes, with people.
Well, then moving on to the investment side, how, I always got the question, it's like, hey, call me if you see a good deal, which to me is the most subjective of questions.
Sure.
Because what's the definition of a good deal? Like, it's very personal.
Yeah.
How do you size up investment opportunities, asset classes, all that kind of fun stuff?
Well, so how do I, well, there's 2 things. How do I do it? Or like if somebody's approaching me, the question I'll normally ask them is like, what do you want to build? Tell me what you want to build. And then I could help you understand like what you should be looking at, right? Only because I can see it now from a 360 perspective. I've talked to so many investors, right? But personally, mine is I want a 15% cash on cash return, right? Like that's like minimum cash on cash return. I want 15% on that. You and I were buying assets in 2008 when the market crashed, and I literally like got all my money back out. And I was like, what was that return? That was like an infinite return, right? I got all my money back out. I still owned all of those assets today. That portfolio is paid off free and clear. And we took a line, an equity line against that, against those assets to lend money or to just be opportunistic. To look for today something that's like a 15% cash on cash return. If I could do better than that, great. I don't want to do less than that. And in our market, everything is super expensive. So we had to go to some secondary markets. You'll know, like in Front Royal or Winchester, in those markets, you see growth being pushed out because affordability is such a problem where we live. So we've been buying in those markets and doing really well. And so we own some Airbnbs, some long-term stuff, a lot of long-term stuff in the DMV area, and some multifamily, right? But we primarily own single-family houses. That's what I know best, right?
And what, and I, not to bring up old stuff, but I know that you've learned some lessons in buying in the wrong market.
Oh yeah.
talk to us about that.
I think the biggest is making sure that you're moving into a growth market. So many people get seduced by.
That's interesting.
Right. They get seduced by looking at cash flow markets, but some of these cash flow markets on paper look great, but in reality they're not, because the assets are older. There's tons of wear and tear. The tenant pool isn't great, and the asset value itself is just because the community is not growing, it's not increasing in value. So there are parts around the US where, believe it or not, like those asset values are declining, right? And so you put on, this is extremely painful, right? You buy a duplex for, let's say, $60,000 in a market like that, and 15 years later, that duplex is worth $50,000, but that roof cost you $10,000, right? The tenant turnover is still like $2,000. Before you know it, you're like, just carrying this asset is not worth it. And I always wondered why people shut buildings down. And then I shut a building down because I realized it was less expensive for me to shut the building down than to actually put a tenant into it. It was a triplex, a bad street, bad investment. I just sold it this year.
This year?
This year.
Because I remember when you started buying all that stuff.
Yeah. I owned it like 16, 17 years. I sold it this year. And you took a bath, but I took a bath And I made a lot of money on some other stuff. And I just said, okay, well, I'm taking a bath on this one. I'm making a profit on this one. Hopefully the taxes balance themselves out. Right.
So what was the lesson learned there? Because I remember when you analyzed the opportunity, you thought you had discovered, you know, alchemy.
Yeah. 2 lessons, right? Well, lesson 1 is I only want to move into a market that is growing. So I'm going to be pulling and saying.
And so what's the definition of that? Let's unpack that.
Well, I want to see a market that's increasing in size by 2 or 3%.
Population growth.
Population growth. You're going to be looking at permits as well, but I care about population growth, right? Like the more babies that are being made and families that are moving in, that is a good thing for a real estate investor, right? And time will do its thing. If I'd done a little bit of homework, I would have learned that market was losing 2% per year. Okay, so that was lesson number 1. Lesson number 2 was I talked to a lot of investors in that market that all hated their assets. Okay, they all hate, and I just thought that they weren't good managers, and I was going to come in because I'm awesome and manage these things better than anybody else, only to realize that no, this was incredibly hard, and I was the sucker left holding the bag, right? But here was the interesting. There was 2 people that I met that loved their assets in that market. So there's another valuable lesson.
I was going to say, were there any happy customers?
There were a couple people that loved their assets. One of them was essentially he owner financed everybody. So he would go to the courthouse stairs, he'd buy an asset for $30,000, he'd put in $30,000, and then he'd sell it for $90,000 at a 10% interest rate, right? And he was essentially acting almost like the first subprime lender in that market, and then allowing people to refinance out 2, 3, 4, or 5 years. And he said he had notes for 20 or 30 years. People just wouldn't refinance out at that 10%. He loved his business, and he made a ton of money. And I should have picked up on that. Like, he was this older guy, super nice, he was giving me wisdom, and I wasn't paying attention. So I think that's another lesson. Pay attention to who's making money in a market. And every market, there's a way to make money. That was my lesson. You could make money in that market.
But he was hyper local, knew everything, all the details.
Yeah, he knew the details. And we were hyper local. We knew everybody. We knew everything. But he understood that you didn't want to be a landlord in that market. You actually wanted to be the lender in that market, right? And he crushed it. So those were the 2 most valuable lessons I learned.
That second one's really powerful.
Yeah.
And so now, last question. This is an interesting one, especially with your skill sets. Yeah. If you were dropped into a brand new market.
Oh, yeah.
And you had it all to start over with the wisdom now, but no dollars can be involved, how would you go about building a business?
I'm going to do it. Like, I'll come here. I don't know anybody. I'll probably move to Miami at some point, right? I would open up a community, right? I would open up a grid community. And what that would allow me to do is meet everybody that's who's who of this market in investments. So I would pick up the phone, I would call them, I would invite them to this investor event that we're going to do. I would probably feature them and do this while an audience is watching, so I'd end up making friends with them. I would learn about the market, and I would build my Rolodex of multi-transactional clients very quickly in a market, leveraging my investment community, right? I'd find out who's making money in the market, how they're making money in the market, who the hard money lenders are, who the private lenders are, who the contractors are. Like, the community gives you everything if you're paying attention and you're listening. And then I would get to work. Then I would just start like R&Ding the people that are doing really well in that particular market. And then I would control inventory, right? Like, the big thing for me is you want to be the employer, not the employee. So I would go out and, what's happening right now is we're probably going to see a lot of people starting to miss payments as consumer debt is on the rise. And so I would probably be targeting pre-foreclosures and controlling that asset class and getting to them before anything happens with the bank, right? Just making cash offer type of offers from an agent standpoint, and controlling as much inventory as I possibly can, and then matching that inventory to my investor pool that I built from the investment network.
What's your favorite way to find those sellers in today's world? Because I agree with you. We have a lot of consumer debt that's maturing and defaulting, but it'll be pre-foreclosure. It won't actually be foreclosure.
It won't. There's too much equity, right? So I think just a very basic for somebody that can't afford any of the data, because data is there's a lot of data out there that you can get, but like let's say you can't afford the data, right? Typically what's going on the outside is also going on in the inside. So you can drive neighborhoods and you could spot distressed assets. You could spot when somebody is potentially behind on payments based on the exterior of the home, right? So if I didn't have any money at all and I didn't have access to data, I would just be building a driving for dollars list, right? And I think a driving for dollars list is such a simple way to get into the market for a brand new agent. The problem is people drive for dollars, they write the address down and then do nothing with it. So you have to be able to like skip trace that phone number, make the phone call, have the discipline around that, and build a farm. Essentially, that's how I would look at it, a farm of distressed assets or properties that look like they have some level of distress, and just like call through them and then mail them and call through them and just be consistent on that and start getting inventory that way.
So what's the script when you find that phone number? What do you call and say?
I would just say, hey, did I reach Leo? Is this Leo?
Yep, this is he.
Hey, Leo, I'm an investor that is looking to purchase in this market, and just out of curiosity, do you know of anybody that's thinking about selling their property in this neighborhood? Because we really like this neighborhood. We've identified the neighborhood that you live in as a neighborhood that we want to own in, and I'm just curious if you know of anybody. So very indirect.
Yeah, you don't actually say, hey, do you own 123 Main Street?
Like if I know that they live there, right? Yes. If I know that they live there, the answer is no. If I'm pulling up all the data on Mojo and I could see that they own like other stuff, then I'm going to call and make that call. So I remember one time I challenged myself to make 1,000 of those phone calls like in one day. And I was like, I'm just going to make 1,000 of those calls, and it was they were the most productive calls I've ever had. Like, so this was just an investor list, people that own stuff, and I would just call and I'd act confused, right? Because like when you're confused, there's curiosity around that. I'd be like, I don't know if I have the right person. Is this Leo? And they're like, yeah, this is Leo. I'm like, oh, Leo, I see that you own this property at 123 Main Street. Just out of curiosity, are you planning on keeping that for life, or are you thinking that you might sell that in the next 30 to 60, 90 days or the next 6 months, right? And that would just enter into a conversation. That's if they're an investor, right? And I already know, and I'm pulling up the data. And that's what we used Remine for, right? So we pulled all that data from Remine and we made those calls, right?
Awesome. Well, Rob, I appreciate you spending some time and sharing. I'm excited to continue to watch you build, especially as you take Grid national.
Yeah, man. I appreciate it. Thanks so much.
Thank you.